My name is Tori Ives, and I'm 34 years old. 4 years after my family told our whole church I'd disappeared, my brother found my front door. It was a Tuesday in September. I was cutting apple slices for my daughter when the knock came. I opened the door and there stood Danny, my little brother, gripping his phone like a shield. He said my name. Then he looked past my shoulder, and every drop of color left his face. He backed down on my porch steps without another word, phone already at his ear. "Mom, you need to see this. She never told us." He couldn't finish the sentence. What my mother did with that phone call, and what I finally did on a Sunday morning, in front of every person who believed her, is why I'm telling this story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally tell the truth about the families that underestimated them. If stories about boundaries, betrayal, and starting over speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. There's a house in Asheville, North Carolina, with a front door the color of a robin's egg. I painted it myself the week we moved in. 3 coats, cheap brush, good light. The last coat of paint went on the day I stopped apologizing. Inside that house lives a 3.5-year-old named Marin, who believes pancakes are a food group. I work 12-hour shifts in the intensive care unit downtown, sometimes 16. I can recite the medication schedules of 8 patients without looking at a chart. Most days, I forget to eat lunch. I've watched people die politely. My family taught me how. That's a joke I only make on the drive home, alone, where nobody has to decide whether to laugh. Our life is small and deliberate. Daycare, work, pancakes, the library on Saturdays. First it was rent, then a mortgage. I still can't believe a bank gave me. I painted every wall in that house, but the door was the only color I agonized over. Blue, like the sky at the end of a night shift, when the world is quiet and finally belongs to you. In 4 years, nobody from Dayton, Ohio, had crossed under that doorframe. That was not an accident. It was also not the story my family told about it. They said I disappeared. Here's the thing about the word disappeared. It's passive. Fog disappears. Car keys disappear. It's a word that erases whoever did the erasing. What actually happened is that I stopped sending money home, and my family stopped being able to see me. The money is where this story starts. It isn't where it ends. It started, if I'm being exact, and I'm a nurse. I'm always exact. With an envelope at my own graduation dinner 10 years ago, at my mother's kitchen table. The spring I turned 24, I became the first Ives to finish college, a nursing degree, paid for with loans and double shifts at a diner. My mother, Carol, threw a dinner at the house in Dayton. Pot roast, a folding table pushed against the kitchen table, a sheet cake with my name spelled right. She propped my diploma against the gravy boat like a guest of honor. My father, Ray, said the blessing. Danny, 19 then, ate most of the cake. For about 2 hours, I was the pride of that kitchen, and I would have done anything to stay that way. I want you to remember that feeling, because my mother certainly did. After the plates were cleared, she slid an envelope across the table. Cream-colored. My name on the front in her tidy church bulletin handwriting. I thought it was a card. It was empty. "For the house," she said, patting my hand. "You're the one who made it out." She said it warmly, the way you'd hand someone a family recipe. Around the table, nobody blinked. Dad studied his coffee. Danny looked at the cake. I remember laughing a little because I thought I understood. One envelope. One favor. The least I could do. New nurses make decent money, and their furnace was old, and I was the one who made it out. I filled it from my first real paycheck and mailed it back. The second month, a fresh envelope arrived at the apartment I shared with 2 other new nurses, my name in that same neat hand. The third month, another. Nobody ever asked out loud again. The asking had been done once, at a celebration, in front of witnesses, dressed as pride. That envelope was never meant to be filled once. It was a subscription. I just didn't read the terms, because the terms were written in a language I'd been raised to call love. By year 2, I'd switched us to Zelle, because stamps felt absurd. The first of every month, money left my account before sunrise. $1,400. Most months. 2,000 in the bad ones. And there was always a bad one coming. A new furnace, Dad's truck transmission, a new roof after the hailstorm. I paid for that roof and felt proud of it. A daughter keeping rain off her father's head from 3 states away. Danny's used Honda when his job started requiring a car. Christmas envelopes on top. Easter envelopes. Birthday envelopes. On my side of the ledger, it looked like this. Night differential? Holiday pay? Every Christmas shift for 6 straight years because Christmas paid double. I was the nurse who never said no to overtime. My coworkers thought I was saving for something. I just couldn't have told you what. I kept a running total in a notebook, updated to the dollar. Not because I wanted it back. Because numbers were the only thing in that house that never lied. Words got slippery in my family. Words like borrow and help, and just this once. Numbers held still. By the 6th year, the total had 6 figures in it. I'll tell you the exact number later. I have said it out loud exactly once in my life. And when I tell you where, you'll understand why. Once was enough. One more thing about that roof. Since I paid for it. In a photo Danny texted one Thanksgiving, I could see the corner of the house, and the blue tarp was still on it. A year after the hailstorm. I told myself contractors were slow in Ohio. I told myself a lot of things back then. Telling myself things was cheaper than asking my mother questions, and in those days I still thought I couldn't afford the answers. The east entrance of the hospital had a rotted awning, and the man who came to rebuild it was named Caleb Brand. He was a builder, 28 then, sawdust in his hair, and he stopped me on my way out of a night shift to ask a question. What railing height worked best for patients who'd just relearned to walk? I gave him the rehab unit's numbers from memory, half asleep, and he wrote them down like they were poetry. He rebuilt that awning better than the blueprints asked for. Then he asked me to breakfast, since dinner was, in his words, the middle of my night. For 3 years he packed my lunches and labeled them by shift. When he proposed, there was no diamond. He tied a brass key on a ribbon. The key to a sagging little fixer-upper he'd made an offer on, with a porch he swore he'd have coffee on until he was 90. A door key instead of a ring. I said yes to the key. I took him to Dayton exactly once. My mother asked what he made an hour before she asked his middle name. She asked whether builders got benefits. She asked who carried the insurance. He answered everything with that easy patience of his, and on the drive home he just said, "Your mom sure loves numbers." He had no idea how right he was, and I didn't tell him, because I hadn't let myself count it yet. That night, while he slept, my phone lit up. A text from my mother. Just for me. He seems steady, honey. Also, a small loan this month? Don't tell your father. I stared at it a long time. My engagement, it turned out, had a price of admission. I paid it. I want to be honest with you about that. For 6 years, I always paid it. That fall, the flu came early and emptied half my unit, and the half still standing worked like sled dogs. I came off a 16-hour shift, slept through an alarm for the first time in my adult life, and woke up on the 4th of the month. The money went out 3 days late. 3 days. I remember thinking, as I hit send, that nobody would even notice. The phone rang at 7 the next morning. My mother didn't yell. Yelling, I could have fought. Her voice was flat and clean, like a bill. She said the mortgage had been due. She said she'd had to move money around in front of my father, which was humiliating. And then she said the sentence I have carried in my chest for 5 years, the one this whole story runs on. You don't get to be tired. You're the one who made it. I stood in my kitchen in scrubs I'd been wearing so long they'd gone soft, and I looked at my own hands, and I apologized. Twice. She accepted once. I said I'd set up an automatic transfer so it could never happen again, and she said that would be best, and we hung up like a bank and a customer. Here is what shames me now. It isn't that she said it. People tell you who they are all the time. That part is free. It's that I spent the whole drive to work agreeing with her, rehearsing better systems, backup alarms, ways to never again be tired in a way that inconvenienced anyone. I was 29 years old, apologizing for sleeping after keeping strangers alive all night. It would take a catastrophe to make me put the phone down. Life, in its terrible efficiency, had one scheduled. It was a Tuesday in November, and I was mid-shift when the charge nurse came to find me, and I knew before she spoke, because I have been the face that comes to find people. A scaffold on a commercial job downtown. A cable that failed inspection paperwork said was fine. Caleb Brand, 31 years old, was gone before the ambulance cleared the second light. I have taken care of dying strangers with more ceremony than the universe spent on the man who labeled my lunches. His crew carried him at the funeral, 8 builders in borrowed ties, crying like weather. My family did not come. 7 hours was called a long drive. They sent carnations with a card signed the Ives family in my Aunt Sharon's handwriting, which meant my mother had delegated the flowers. 4 days after the funeral, my mother texted me. "So sorry about everything, honey. Will this month's transfer be late with all this going on?" I read it standing in Caleb's closet, holding a flannel shirt that still smelled like cut lumber. I sent the money on time. I tell you that without pride. Grief makes you obedient before it makes you anything else. 2 weeks later, I fainted on the unit, and a friend named Dina marched me to the drugstore, and in a fluorescent bathroom, 2 pink lines came up like a sunrise I had no idea what to do with. Night shift had wrecked my cycles for years. I'd assumed stress was doing the rest. The ultrasound tech's math said 16 weeks. I did my own math in that dark room, cold gel on my stomach, alone. I was 5 months from being someone's mother, and 1 phone call from being no one's daughter. I just didn't know the second part yet. I found out on a Sunday. I planned that call the way I plan a medication pass. Order, dosage, no surprises. In the shower, I rehearsed it. Mom, Caleb died. Mom, I'm pregnant. Mom, the doctor says my blood pressure is dangerous, and I have to stop sending money and keep every dollar and every heartbeat calm. Simple. True. In what order do you hand your mother a death, a grandchild, and a boundary? I chose wrong. I led with the boundary. She answered on the second ring, and I said, "Mom, I have to stop sending money." And that is as far as I ever got. The line detonated. Ungrateful. After everything. So, this is who you are now. The mortgage. My father's heart. Who did I think had paid for my ambition? Then the dial tone, flat as a heart monitor with nothing left to say. I called back twice. Voicemail. Voicemail. I sat on the bathroom floor and felt the words I never got to deliver. Caleb's name, the baby, settle back into my chest like swallowed glass. That week, my blood pressure earned me a specialist. The specialist used the words preterm risk and said stress like it was a controlled substance. Cut it down, or spend the pregnancy in a bed. So I tried the last door. I called my father. I could hear his garage radio, and I said, "Dad, please, something's happened." And Ray Ives, who once drove 4 hours for my choir concert, said quietly, "Don't upset your mother." Not what happened. Not "Are you okay?" Every road into that family ran through Carol, and Carol had closed the road. I set the phone down on the counter, face down, and I did not pick it back up. They could have asked one question. Just one. They never did. 7 hours away, my mother started telling a story. It just wasn't mine. If you've ever been the family ATM, the one they call on the first of the month and forget on your birthday, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read everyone. It reminds me none of us were ever as alone as they made us feel. I need you to understand how the word disappeared got manufactured, because nobody in my family ever told a lie you could quote. It started with my Aunt Sharon, my mother's sister and personal broadcasting network. 2 months after that phone call, she posted on Facebook, "Praying for my sister through a heartbreaking season. Some children forget the people who raised them. No names. Names weren't necessary." Then came coffee hour at First Grace, the little church in Dayton where my mother has run the women's committee since before I could walk. Somebody asked where I'd gotten to, since I'd missed the harvest dinner. My mother, I'm told, looked down at her shoes. She let the silence sit there until it soured, and then she said, We don't really know anymore, and touched her eyes with a tissue. We don't really know anymore. Every word of that sentence is technically true. She didn't know, because she'd hung up before knowing was possible. That's the genius of it. By the next coffee hour, a woman from the choir was using the word disappeared, and my mother didn't correct her. And a thing that is not corrected in a small church becomes scripture by Advent. My mother never lied. She just declined, again and again, to tell the truth, and wept at the right moments, and let 200 decent people write the story for her. In the only court she cared about, the one that met on Sundays, grief like hers was evidence, and the missing daughter was tried without ever being called. I knew none of this at the time. I was 7 hours south, learning what swollen ankles meant, counting down to delivery. Danny told me all of it years later, ashamed, at my own kitchen table. But you should carry it with you through the next part, like I now carry it everywhere. While I was learning to be a mother, my mother was teaching a congregation I had vanished. So let me close the question I opened at the start. Why I really stopped sending money. Because the answer was never spite, and it fits in one sentence. I had one salary, one dangerous blood pressure reading, one baby coming, and no one left to split the world with. That's it. That's the scandal. The last months of that pregnancy, I built a life with the sound off. I assembled a crib alone with a video playing on a paint bucket. Dina took my worst shifts and told the unit manager I was on light duty before I'd worked up the nerve to ask. The money that used to leave on the first of the month stayed and became a car seat, and the last piece of a down payment on a small brick house in West Asheville, and a cushion for the weeks I wouldn't work. It felt obscene at first, watching my own money stay. Like hoarding. That's what 6 years of envelopes does to your arithmetic. I moved in at 8 months pregnant, Dina carrying everything heavier than a lamp, and I painted the front door blue before I'd unpacked the kitchen. And in my 8th month, I wrote one letter, by hand, on real paper, to my grandmother June, my father's mother, 78 then, the only person in that family who'd rather hear a hard truth than a smooth story. I gave her everything, Caleb, and the scaffold, and the baby, due in the fall, and the money, and the phone call. My mother ended before it started. I gave her my new address in Asheville, the only soul in Ohio to get it, and I asked for nothing except that she know. Then I watched the mailbox. 2 weeks? 6. The baby dropped. My ankles won. The mailbox stayed empty. I told myself the mail lost it. The other possibility, that even June believed them now, was too heavy to pick up. So I left it on the floor of me and shut the door. I was about to have other things to carry. Marin Brandeis arrived on an April morning, 3 weeks early, unbothered by any of it. The blood pressure that had threatened me all summer held, barely, and the delivery went fast. My daughter has never once waited politely for anything, and I hope she never learns. Dina stood where a family stands. She held my hand through the worst hour and narrated like a golf announcer to keep me laughing, and when it was over, she cut the cord because somebody who loved us should. They put 6 pounds of furious black-haired girl on my chest, and I want to tell you something about myself. One nurse to whoever you are out there. On my unit, I was famous for my dry eyes. 6 years of codes and last breaths and families folding in half in hallways, and I stayed the calm one, every time, because somebody in the room has to be. The nurse who never cried, cried. Not gently. The kind that startles the staff. Because she was here, and she was safe, and the 2 people who should have been pacing that waiting room with gas station coffee didn't know she existed. One because he was gone, and one because she'd hung up the phone. We named her Marin. Caleb said it once on the porch of that little fixer-upper he never got to buy, trying names out loud like paint colors, and when he hit that one he'd grinned and said, "Her. Someday." So it was always hers. It took a lawyer and a patient stack of paperwork, but her father's name is on the birth certificate of a girl he never met, and the brass key he gave me instead of a ring hangs in a little frame by my front door to this day. I came home from the hospital with her 4 days later. Then I did the thing my family would later call disappearing. I lived. Here's what 4 years of peace looks like, compressed like a night shift handoff. It turns out you can breathe shockingly well when you stop funding a second household. The mortgage on the little brick house got lighter every year, the dogwood in the yard got taller, and my daughter learned to walk on a sloped street in West Asheville. The door stayed blue, touched up every spring, never changed. And I already told you about the last coat. I got days instead of nights when she started preschool. I learned to make pancakes shaped like alarming dinosaurs. Dina became godmother, then family, the kind you choose with your eyes open. And every December, I sent exactly one piece of mail north. A Christmas card to my grandmother June, with a school photo tucked inside, and my return address printed neat in the corner. No phone number, no demands. One card a year, every year, into that long silence, because some part of me refused to let the road grow over completely. I never knew if she read them or burned them. I never knew whose version of me she believed. That answer was coming, and when it came, it would arrive hidden in a sewing box. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I want you to know about those years is quieter than any of that. Somewhere in them, I stopped flinching when the phone rang on the first of the month. Stopped drafting apologies to no one. Being needed is not the same as being loved. It took me 30 years to learn the difference and 4 more to believe it, and my daughter will grow up knowing it for free. I thought the story was over, honestly. I thought peace was a place you get to keep. Then, on a Tuesday in September, somebody knocked on the blue door. To make sense of that knock, you need the date inside, which I got from Danny afterward. In pieces. Like a man handing back stolen goods. In 4 years, the word disappeared had grown barnacles. There was a version where I'd gotten mixed up with drugs. Whispered. Never confirmed. A version with a controlling boyfriend who'd cut me off from everyone. Which is almost funny if you don't chew on it. My mother presided over all of them the same way. Declining to confirm. Declining to deny. Glowing faintly with martyrdom, the sorrowful queen of every casserole line. The story cost her nothing and paid her weekly. And it might have run forever. Except my grandmother June got pneumonia in the spring. 82 now. Hospitalized twice. Home with an oxygen line and a new relationship with her own time. And June, who had spent 4 years saying almost nothing, stopped playing along. She said it at a Sunday dinner in front of witnesses, which is the Ives way of making things official. Bring me Tori, or bring me a phone, but I am not dying politely in a house full of liars. Danny says a fork actually stopped midair. So now watch what my mother needed. Not her daughter. She'd had 4 years to want her daughter. She needed to produce me, publicly, on her own terms, as a rescue. The lost lamb found, the mother vindicated, the story landing intact. Within a week, Danny, 29 now, driving delivery routes, still living in their basement, was handed a slip of paper with an Asheville address in our mother's tidy handwriting. He didn't ask where she got it. He told me that at my kitchen table, staring into a coffee he never drank. I didn't ask Tori, I should have. Hold that thought. It matters more than he knew. He drove 7 hours with the radio off, and on a Tuesday in September, he knocked. Which brings us back to the apple slices. The knock was soft, almost apologetic, and I wasn't expecting anyone. And through the front window, I could see a slice of him. A tall man in a delivery company polo, shifting his weight on my porch like the boards might bill him. It took me a second, and then it took my breath. Danny. 4 years older around the eyes, my baby brother, standing on the far side of the blue door with my past in his pocket. I stood with my hand on the latch for 3 seconds. I've timed worse decisions in codes. 3 seconds is long. In the first second, I saw the option where I went still and let him knock at an empty-sounding house, and kept my peace, and shook for an hour behind the couch like a fugitive in my own kitchen. In the second, I saw the option where I cracked the door 6 inches, gave him nothing, sent him home with a shrug for our mother, and spent every following Tuesday waiting for the next knock. And in the third second, I understood something with the cold clarity that usually only visits me at work. I had done nothing wrong. I had built this house, this life, this child, out of honest overtime and grief. and I was done conducting my life through gaps in doorways. Hiding was the last piece of my mother's story I was still performing, so I opened the door, all the way, wide, the way you open it for whether you've decided to stop pretending isn't coming. "Hi, Danny," I said, and watched 4 years hit my brother in the face. He opened his mouth, and that was the exact moment I heard it behind me. Bare feet on hardwood, coming fast, the drum roll of my entire hidden life arriving at the door. "Mommy? Who is it?" Here is what my brother saw, in the order he saw it. A girl, 3.5, skidding into the hallway in dinosaur socks. Black hair, deep-set eyes, the Ives chin. My grandmother June's face, the face from every hallway photo in Dayton, reprinted at 3 feet tall and asking who's at the door. Danny made a sound like he'd been elbowed. And then his eyes went past her, down the hall, to the wall I never thought about anymore, because I lived with it. Caleb's photograph, with the funeral ribbon still folded over one corner of the frame, the ultrasound in its little silver frame beside it, and Dina's snapshot of me, 8 months pregnant, standing alone in front of a half-painted blue door with a roller in my hand. I watched my brother do the math nobody had ever let him see. The great riddle of the family, 4 years of it, solved in 4 seconds on a porch. He went white. He backed down my steps like the porch was tilting and his phone was already at his ear, and I heard it. The sentence you heard at the beginning. The one that started everything ending. "Mom, you need to see this. She never told us." And then nothing. Because there was no end to that sentence that wasn't an accusation of somebody, and he was only just realizing of whom. He lowered the phone. My little brother sat down on my porch steps and cried into his hands. I brought him inside. "What else do you do?" He sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours, and he asked the question no Ives had ever asked. "How did he die, Tori?" And he listened to every word of the answer. At the door, leaving, he set a cream-colored envelope on the porch railing, careful, like it was heavier than it looked. My name on the front in our mother's handwriting. Inside, a printed church invitation. Homecoming Sunday, October 12th, First Grace Church. All are welcome home. "She wants you there," Danny said. "She's going to fix this, Tori." "Fix it how?" He looked at his shoes. He didn't know. I did. Danny's taillights were barely off my street before the family found my number, and that night a cousin added me back to the group chat. The one named Ives family with a little house icon, as if nothing had happened, as if I'd been out sick. By 2 in the morning there were 41 messages. I read them with the phone lighting up the ceiling, and I watched, in real time, my mother's story shed its skin. The early messages were almost human. "She's alive. Oh my gosh. Is that really her house?" Then, around midnight, the new narrative arrived, fully dressed. You could tell it came from my mother without her typing a word. The way you can tell a sermon's author from the pews. She hid a child from us. 4 years. Her own mother. Aunt Sharon, in her signature all-caps grief, "We deserve answers." A cousin posted a string of little hearts under a photo Danny had apparently described, a photo he'd never taken, of a niece none of them had met. Overnight, in one chat thread, I went from the daughter who disappeared to the daughter who deceived. Same church, same jury, new charge. The story could survive anything except being my story. And here's the detail I keep in the same pocket where I keep everything else from that year. 41 messages, and I read every one of them twice, standing in my kitchen while my daughter slept. Not one asked about the man in the funeral frame. Not one asked his name, or how he died, or how I'd carried a baby alone through the worst year of my life. Grief wasn't on the family ledger. It had no cash value, so it didn't post. I put the phone in the junk drawer and went to bed. The next evening, my mother called me herself. Nearly 4 years since the dial tone. I answered. "I'm still deciding if I regret that." She was crying before I finished saying hello. I want to be fair. My mother's tears are real. Real, the way rain on a stage is real. Actual water. Engineered timing. "My baby," she kept saying. "My baby had a baby." I stood at my kitchen window watching Marin gather acorns in the yard and let the storm front pass through. I said the only true thing I had. You could have known her since the day she was born, Mom. All you had to do was let me finish one sentence. A pause. Recalibration. I could hear it. An almost mechanical sound, grief switching tracks to strategy. And then my mother, dry-eyed now, made me an offer. Come to homecoming, sweetheart. Stand with me. I'll tell everyone you were sick. You were, weren't you? With your blood pressure? A sick girl who couldn't reach out isn't a scandal, honey. It's a testimony. No one ever has to know about the money. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was too busy being impressed. The way you can be impressed by a flood. Notice, please, everything that sentence did. It diagnosed me retroactively. With love. It converted 4 years of erasure into a redemption arc with her in the lead. And it buried the money, the 6 years, the 6 figures, the actual reason, under the church carpet, forever, with my signature on the burial. My mother wasn't apologizing. She was offering me a better produced lie and a supporting role in it. She didn't want her daughter back. She wanted the rights to the story, and I was a licensing problem. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up, and stood in my kitchen shaking. Not with fear, which surprised me, with recognition. Then, 2 nights later, my phone rang with an Ohio number I didn't know, and a voice I hadn't heard in 4 years said my name like it had never once doubted me. Gravel and Lace, saying my full name like it had never once been in doubt. My grandmother, June. Danny had given her the number, the first useful thing that address slip ever did. I sat down on my kitchen floor like the ground had been recalled, and for a second I couldn't say anything at all. She filled the silence like she'd been saving up. She'd gotten my letter. 4 years ago. Every page. She'd read my cards every December, school photo by school photo, and kept them where keeping them was safe. And I'll tell you where that was when I tell you what it meant. Why didn't you write back? I asked, and hated how small my voice came out. 34 going on 8. Look at my hands, child, she said, dry as toast. They shake like a paint mixer. And a letter leaving this family gets read at more checkpoints than a prisoner of wars. Then her voice went to a place I'd never heard it go, quiet and level, like testimony. I want you to hear this from me while I can still say it plain. I never believed the word disappeared, not for one day. People don't disappear, Tori. They get erased. And I have sat at that woman's table the better part of 40 years, watching who holds the eraser. I pressed my hand over my mouth so she couldn't hear what it was doing. 4 years I'd told myself I didn't need a single soul in Ohio to believe me. You can live on that. It's just that you find out what it weighed the moment somebody sets it down. Now, she said, brisk again, I'm told there is a girl at your house with my face on her. Bring her to me while these eyes still work. Not for a show. For a Saturday. So that settled that, almost. You already know it didn't stay a Saturday. Before I tell you what happened inside that church, let me ask you something. If the people who erased you invited you back, to a room where everyone believed their version, would you walk in? Type yes or no in the comments. I promise, by the end of this story, you'll know exactly what I chose and what it cost me. Let me be clear about what I decided, because it wasn't courage. I decided not to go to homecoming. I had no interest in my mother's stage, her lost lamb pageant, her congregation of 200 jurors. What I wanted fit on an index card. My grandmother's porch, my daughter on it, and the 2 of them in the same October light before her eyes or her lungs gave out. So I built the visit the way I build a night shift. Tight, timed, no exposure. Drive up Friday after my shift, 7 hours, which with a 3-year-old and her bladder is 9. A motel off the interstate on the far side of Dayton. 2 beds, free waffles, paid in advance. Saturday at June's house, all day, phones down. Sunday morning, wheels south before First Grace sang its first hymn, before the coffee was even percolating in that fellowship hall. I would be a roomer by the time the doors opened. In and out, 36 hours. and my mother's homecoming could premiere without its main character. Let her improvise. She was good at that. Dina came over the night before we left and watched me pack like she was proctoring an exam. "And when your mother finds out you're in town," she said. "Dayton's a small pond tour. Casserole travels faster than light there. Then I'll be on the interstate before it cools," I said, and we laughed, and I half believed it. I strapped Marin's car seat in and tucked the cream envelope into my bag. Not to use it, just to know where it was. You keep the dangerous medications locked, but you keep them. It was a good plan. Honestly, it was. It survived one afternoon. My grandmother's house sits 3 blocks off the state route, and it had shrunk the way childhood houses do, and she was on the porch before I'd cut the engine. 82 years old, oxygen line looped over her ears like reading glasses she refused to take seriously. Standing when standing cost her something. I unbuckled Marin, and my daughter, who is shy with mailmen, walked straight up those steps like they were hers. June put both shaking hands on that little face and just looked. "There you are," she said. "To Marin. To me. To some version of all of us, I think, going back further than I can see." Inside, we did a Saturday. Soup beans, cornbread, a soap opera June narrated like a horse race. And in the afternoon she sent Marin to fetch her sewing box, the battered tin one I'd known my whole life, and told her to dig under the thread. Every Christmas card I'd ever sent her, rubber-banded, their edges gone soft the way paper gets when it's been read instead of kept. My girl's whole life, held together with a rubber band hidden under buttons. Hidden. That was the word doing all the work in that box. "Why under the thread, Grandma?" I asked, though I already felt the answer coming, the way you feel a rhythm turn bad on a monitor. June looked at me steady. "Because your mother found them last Christmas, at my kitchen table looking for a scissors. She read every one. She put them back where they were, and she never said a word of it, to me or anybody. Last Christmas, 10 months ago. My mother had my address for 10 months, while her church prayed for her lost girl. She didn't need to find me. She needed me lost. I was worth more missing. Here's how a small pond works. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a Buick pulled up in front of June's house, and my Aunt Sharon climbed out holding a casserole dish she was allegedly returning. A dish, June muttered, that she'd been sitting on since Easter. Sharon had heard June had company. She'd come to see what kind. What kind was 3.5 on the porch steps, teaching a doll to count acorns. I watched my aunt's face do something I recognized from the group chat. Arithmetic, then appetite. She stayed under 10 minutes. She hugged me on the way out, an inventory disguised as affection, and said, wet-eyed, "You look wonderful. She's just precious. Your mama must be over the moon." And then the Buick was gone, moving with purpose. By supper time, Danny texted me that the parish knew. All of it. The girl, the visit, June's porch. And that evening, at the homecoming eve potluck in the fellowship hall, in front of the folding tables and the banner committee, my mother rose with her hand on her heart and made it official. Danny was there. He sent it to me nearly word for word, and I could hear her cadence in every line of it. "God has brought my lost lamb home to Ohio. My daughter is here, with my grandbaby, and this Sunday she will stand before this congregation, and this family will be made whole in the sight of the Lord." Applause, he said. Actual applause. 2 women cried. I sat on a motel bed reading that, while my daughter slept 8 feet away, and the thing I felt wasn't rage yet. It was vertigo. In one afternoon, I'd been written into a show I had explicitly declined. My mother had sold tickets to a performance whose lead had never taken the role, and the curtain went up in 15 hours. Then someone knocked on the motel room door. It was Danny, still in his potluck clothes, holding a spiral notebook like it was leaking. Mom's household ledger, decades of it, the neat columns I'd grown up watching her total at the kitchen table. He'd found it last spring, digging through Mom's file box for June's Medicare paperwork, and he'd been carrying what was in it ever since. He put it on the motel desk and opened it to the years I knew by heart because I had funded them. "You should see where it went," he said. So I saw. The roof, my roof, The hailstorm roof was one line. Patch, materials, $340, labor Ray and Danny. My father and brother had fixed that roof themselves, for the cost of shingles, while $1,400 a month kept arriving. Where the rest went was all there, in her own handwriting. First Grace Building Fund, in the name of Carol Ives. Benevolence Committee, Carol Ives. The Women's Retreat Sponsorship. The Fellowship Hall Ovens. The Youth Van Repair. Carol Ives, Carol Ives, Carol Ives. And loans. To Sharon's son for a transmission. To a cousin for a security deposit. Never repaid, never forgiven either. Every debt logged and kept alive, a portfolio of people who owed her. My money hadn't been keeping my family afloat. It had been buying my mother a throne in a very small kingdom. I sat back, and the anger I'd been waiting years to feel finally stood up. And then Danny turned to the oldest pages and pointed at a line dated 1989, and it sat back down. Wedding ring, pond, mama's back rent, and a number small enough to break your heart. My mother was 24, married 8 months. She'd sold her ring to cover her own parents' debts, and nobody ever paid her back either. She's not spending your money, Tori, Danny said quietly. She's paying a debt she thinks every daughter owes. It made nothing okay. It made everything sadder than anger, and heavier. Understanding my mother didn't obligate me to keep being her currency. But it took revenge off the table. Whatever I did next, it wouldn't be to beat her. The Honda was your money, Danny added at the door, wincing. I'm paying it back. The car was a gift, I said. Gifts were never the part that hurt. I didn't sleep that night. The motel ceiling had a water stain shaped, I swear, like the state of Ohio, and I lay under it, running every route. Leave at dawn, skip the show, let the congregation swallow the no-show however my mother spun it. And she would spin it. I could already hear the sermon about prodigals too ashamed to face the light. Or go. Sit in a back pew. Be a quiet exhibit. Buy peace at the old exchange rate. I was still negotiating with the ceiling when a small voice came from the other bed, half inside a dream. Mommy, do I have a grandma? She'd met June. Great-grandma had landed easily, but she'd been listening all day, the way they always are when we think the words are flying over them, and somewhere in that little head a gap had opened in the paperwork. I lay in the dark and did not answer, and the not answering rang louder than anything I could have said. Because here's what I understood, staring at Waterstain, Ohio. If I stayed silent, my silence wouldn't stay mine. My mother would fill it, the way she'd filled 4 years of it, and someday my daughter would sit in some kitchen and hear that her mommy was the woman who disappeared, who hid, who was too ashamed to stand in front of good people. Silence had been my shelter. From here on, it would only ever be her material. I got up, went into the bathroom, and by that thin yellow light I took out the cream envelope and read it once more. Homecoming Sunday. All are welcome home. In her handwriting, that word, welcome. Marin rolled over in her sleep, and quietly, out loud, to nobody in that rented room, I heard myself say it. I decided to go to church. Now let me tell you how I prepared, because it's how I'd like to be remembered. I did not print bank statements. 6 years of transfers sat in a file cabinet in Asheville, 7 hours south, and that's where I left them, where they had always been, on purpose. I wasn't going to stand in a sanctuary waving paper like a process server. Paper was my mother's language, ledgers, envelopes, receipts on the soul. I was done speaking it. I didn't write a speech either. I know what I sound like when I read from notes, like a discharge summary. And I know what the truth sounds like when you've been carrying it word perfect for 4 years. There was no rehearsal, because there had been nothing but rehearsal. Every night shift, every first of the month, every December card. Instead, I did small, true things. I ironed my navy dress with the motel iron, which fought me. I braided Marin's hair and let her pick the ribbon, and she picked orange, and she was right. Light lipstick. Caleb's brass key, out of the side pocket of my bag, into the pocket of my dress. Not for anyone to see. Ballast. Then I texted Danny. Front pew for Grandma. Aisle end, near the fans. She overheats. Marin and me right behind her. He wrote back fast. Done? And Tori? I'm glad. I sat on the motel bed one last minute, checked my pulse against my watch out of pure habit, and found it steady. Which is the strangest true detail I own from that whole morning. I wasn't bringing evidence. I was bringing myself. That was the one thing they'd never accounted for. First Grace Church holds about 200 people, and that Sunday it held all of them, plus folding chairs. Cars on the grass, a paper banner over the doors. Welcome home. In letters the youth group had clearly cut by hand, ceiling fans stirring 200 bulletins like slow applause. We came in during the second hymn and took the seats Danny had guarded. June on the aisle of the front pew, oxygen line and Sunday pearls. Marin and me right behind her, my daughter armed with a doll and an orange ribbon. Half the sanctuary turned, a wave of faces I'd known my whole childhood, and the temperature of the looking was complicated. My father stood at the very back, along the wall, cap in his hands, the way he stands at funerals. And my mother. My mother wore lavender and a handkerchief she never needed and a microphone. After the offering, she took the pulpit, and the mic squealed once, and she waited out the squeal like a professional. She was good. I want that on the record. She thanked God for seasons of sorrow that end in joy. She pressed the handkerchief to dry eyes at intervals a metronome would envy. My lost lamb, she said, has come home. And then she turned, and found me in the second row, and extended her hand with the mic in it like a communion plate, and said the words she had scripted for both of us. Tori, baby, come up here and give thanks with me. 200 faces swiveled. The fans turned. Somewhere behind me, a pew creaked like a ship. And there it was, the whole choice, laid out plain as a monitor strip. Stay seated, smile, wave, drive home intact, and let her version calcify over my life and start growing over my daughter's. Or stand up and burn the last bridge with my name on it, the one marked daughter who might someday come home. There would be no third Tory after this. I looked at June. My grandmother gave me a nod you'd have missed if you weren't starving for it. I let go of the pew. I stood up. I did not take the microphone. First Grace was built in 1921, back when rooms were built for voices, and a calm one carries fine. I stood at the front, hands empty at my sides, and I was, and this is the part I still can't fully explain, not afraid. 10 years in an ICU teaches you what an emergency actually is. This was just the truth, at last, in a room with good acoustics. I didn't disappear, I said. I stopped paying. For 6 years in my family, those were the same thing. You could hear the fans, you could hear a bulletin slide off a knee somewhere, and nobody moved to catch it. $100,000. That's not a figure of speech. I kept the total. You may check my math with anyone here who ever borrowed from it. I watched that number land in 200 people at once, watched a few faces in the middle rows go very still, the faces of transmissions and security deposits. I did not look at them longer than a heartbeat. I hadn't come for them. The year I quote-unquote disappeared, I buried the man I loved and delivered our daughter alone. Nobody asked. One question would have found me. And then I turned to my mother, because the last of it belonged to her, and I gave her back the sentence she'd given me, 5 years late, with the interest of a whole life on it. I was allowed to be tired, Mom. Just never here. The handkerchief came down, and my mother, who had held a note of gracious sorrow through 4 years, who never cracked at coffee hour, who could weep on cue and stop on cue, lost the room's tempo for the first time in her performing life. "How dare you?" she said, and the word dare split in the middle, and the microphone in her hand rang with it. Harsh, electric, too loud. She was shaking. I wasn't. That's not a boast. I'd been rehearsing calm since nursing school, and she'd been rehearsing an audience, and only one of those skills works when the script runs out. I never raised my voice. In a room built for echoes. Quiet turns out to be the loudest thing you can bring. Here's what the truth cost, itemized, since my family raised me to keep totals. The sanctuary split like water around a stone. I watched it happen in real time. Some faces going soft toward me, some going to stone. And the stone ones included people I had loved. Mrs. Hartwell, who taught me to read music in the third-grade choir, studied her hands like they were new. A deacon who used to slip us butterscotch shook his head. Slow, the way you do at a shame. And I understood that in his story I was the shame, and that he would die believing it, and that no document I owned could reach him. That's the tax nobody tells you about. The truth doesn't convince everyone, it just stops the lie from being unanimous. And I felt the other thing go too, the thing I'd actually paid with. Somewhere in that room, the daughter who might someday come home, the one who might someday be forgiven into the fold, invited back to holidays, restored by some future miracle of her mother's heart, that Tori died standing up. I'd killed her myself. I would grieve her later, and I knew it. And I stood there anyway, because she had been costing me everything, and paying in a currency nobody could spend. Then I did the only thing I'd truly come to do. I stepped back to our pew and took my daughter's hand, and led her the few steps forward to the front pew, in full view of 200 people who had prayed for a missing woman who was never missing. Marin, I said, this is your great-grandmother June. She's the reason I still believe in family. My grandmother put her shaking hands on that small face, her own face, made new. And the whole church watched a great-grandmother meet the child they'd been told was hidden from them, and even the stone faces had trouble staying stone. Some things outrank a narrative, not many. That. Then I picked up my daughter, nodded to Danny to bring June, and walked down the center aisle of First Grace Church for the last time in my life. Past the middle rows, past Sharon, who was looking at the number I'd said like it was floating in the air in front of her, because for her it was. She knew which lines of it had her family's name on them. Past pew after pew of people choosing, forever, which story to keep. My mother stepped away from the pulpit as I came level with her. And here is the strangest mercy of that whole day. What she said quietly, with the microphone lowered, to me alone. No audience. For the first time in 4 years, maybe in 40, my mother said something that wasn't staged. Everything I did for this family. And she believed it. That's the part that will never stop being sad. I could see all the way down that sentence, back to a 24-year-old at a pawnshop counter, sliding her wedding ring under the glass, learning forever what a daughter is for. I stopped. I looked at my mother, one arm full of the granddaughter she'd traded for a story, and I said it just as quietly, just for her, the sentence I'd been 30 years earning. Being needed is not the same as being loved, Mom. I hope one day somebody loves you for free. Her face did something I'd never seen it do. I didn't stay to name it. I walked on, and the ushers pushed open the double doors, and October came in. Cold, clean, indifferent, gold. Marin squinted up at me from my hip. Is church over? She asked. Ours is, I said. And we walked out into the sun. We were nearly to the car when I heard gravel moving fast, and it was Danny, tie loose, out of breath. He'd left June with the car door open and the heater running, thorough as ever, and he stood in front of me in the church parking lot with his hands open, like a man showing he's unarmed. He didn't defend her. I want that noted in the family record, whoever keeps it now. He didn't say she means well, or you know how she is, or any of these sentences that had upholstered my childhood. He'd stopped carrying her messages the day he sat down on my porch steps. He just looked at his niece, asleep on my shoulder before we'd even left the lot, and then at me, and asked for the one thing nobody in my family had ever asked me for. Can I come see her? No envelopes. Just an uncle. Just an uncle, 29 years old, and it was the bravest sentence anyone in the Ives family had said out loud in a decade. Sundays, I said, bring nothing. He nodded like I'd handed him something breakable and valuable, because I had. We pulled onto the interstate before the potluck casseroles were even uncovered. Nobody chased us, Nobody needed to. That part of the story was over. 6 weeks later, on a warm Saturday in November, my grandmother June sat on my porch in Asheville. Danny drove her down 7 hours, and she reported with great satisfaction that his taste in radio was a crime. She had the sewing box on her lap. She was teaching Marin to thread a needle, both of them squinting, 4 hands shaking for 2 different reasons, and when the thread finally went through, they cheered like a stadium. My mother's letter had come the Tuesday before. 3 pages, her handwriting, her version. A season of trials, a daughter deceived by grief, scripture about honoring parents, and the word sorry appearing 0 times in any load-bearing sentence. I read it once at the kitchen counter, put it in a drawer, and went back to making dinner. It hurt less than I'd budgeted for. That's the honest miracle. Not that it didn't hurt, but that the wound had finally stopped being load-bearing. From Dayton, the news came through Danny, who calls every Sunday on video so Marin can show him alarming dinosaur pancakes. Our mother stepped back from the treasurer's job, citing her health. A few relatives who'd borrowed from my money have started quietly pressing small bills on June, who takes them without comment and buys yarn. Sharon still calls the cousins on the first of the month. The machine survives. It just runs without me in it. My father sent a card. Inside, in pencil. 1 line. I'm sorry I looked away. I've kept it. I haven't answered it yet. Some doors take more than one coat, and I'm allowed to take my time now. That's rather the point of all this. And yesterday, Marin and I put a fresh touch-up coat on the blue door, her with her own small brush, paint on her nose, on the dogwood, on the cat. The color's called Curacao Sky. She calls it ours. If you have to pay to stay in someone's story, walk out and write your own. The people who love you will read every page for free. That's my story. 4 years of silence, 1 knock on a blue door, and 90 seconds in a church that finally heard the truth. If this reminded you of an envelope you keep filling for people who never ask how you are, take that as your sign. And if someone you love needs to hear this, share it with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.